looks like there's been some kind of disturbance. So they're investigating this. And then you have to kind of go back and wonder, so is what's going on at his house, was there a burglary? Or did he have some kind of episode? And I think
right, or was it him in the state of not control, you know?
I think him having bipolar feels like the easy cop-out for this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, anything we can't explain, we just point to that, but it doesn't add up for me.
Yeah, there's still a lot of things that just don't quite align with it enough for it to be like the end-all, be-all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he was definitely in that home on the 28th because everyone, even his wife, believes that he's the one that set the smoke bombs off. He did not want those people building the house. They were in this big legal dispute. He had even purchased like black clothes and a ski mask like right before. They found a receipt for it. So they think that it was planned. We know his phone is found outside of there. In the Netflix documentary, they suggest, you know, maybe he realized he dropped his phone and he had some kind of like freak out and that led to some kind of break. But again, I think that the mental break is like an easy thing to fall back on because just the pattern of events after that doesn't make sense. So say he has a break. Tell me how he ends up murdered by a stranger who doesn't take anything. Is he hit by a car?
And if he was, like, how did he get into the dumpster again? Like, even that is...
yeah, great point. Yeah, someone would have had to put him in there.
Or he wasn't dead yet and he crawled there to die or for safety. It's just...
There's something missing.
It's another question. Like, every time you come up with a solution, every time you think of like, oh, I bet it was something like this, 5 more questions pop up.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where nothing fits 100%. I feel like we have a lot of unsolved cases that we talk about, but in most of them, I can say like this scenario, like everything fits. We can't prove it, but it makes sense. In this case, I can't think of a single scenario that explains everything that we have and that we've seen. I don't know how you solve a case like this with evidence that we have. And I also found out, like, this is such an aside, and I don't know how it fits in, but apparently in the weeks or so, months or so before he ended up dead, he was convinced that there was like very serious political corruption in Delaware. And he was like having his friend teach him how to do some hacking. And so there are rumors online, like, did that have something to do with what happened? Was this a hit? But if it was a hit, again, all of the roaming around doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. It's almost like, especially in this case of all these episodes, in my opinion, it's like we have a puzzle in front of us, but the pieces are from different puzzles.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you could make 3 different puzzles with this, but you don't know which one you're working on. And so all the pieces are in play.
So yeah, this one literally had me pulling out my hair. It's going to keep me up at night. Unsolved mysteries. So the next episode that was released was Death in Oslo. And this one doesn't have so many rabbit holes as the other one that got left out. But
but it's still fascinating.
It's fascinating, and there are definitely things that got left out. So quick recap. 1995 in Oslo, this woman calls this super high-end motel and registers for a room under Jennifer and Louis Fairgate. So 2 people. She shows up. Some say she shows up alone. Some say she shows up with a man. But if there was a man with her, there isn't, like, no one sees this guy again. Like, who knows where he went or if he ever really was there. I tend to believe he was if we have the name and someone saw him, but it's strange. Now, what's even stranger is, riddle me this. How do you check into a super high-end motel where they don't ask for ID and they don't ask for any form of payment, but they just give you a room? Because that's what happened here.
I literally cannot comprehend this because it makes 0 sense to me, like in any capacity. Like, okay, maybe some shady place on the wrong side of town, okay, but...
I feel like shady places are like want their money up front more than anyone.
But like, okay, maybe skip the ID there, whatever. But like a high-end place, you're spending a decent amount of cash on it, you're gonna want some collateral. You're gonna want the person's name, at least a down payment, maybe not the full thing. Like, you know, like you check in, they're like, we're gonna put a deposit on here just in case you break something or whatever, but nothing.
Yeah, this isn't like 1924 where it's like a handshake and a man's word. Like, it's 1995. So whatever the reason they don't take any form of payment, at some point, a couple of days later, they realize that they need to get payment. So they send a security officer up to the room, knocks on the door, and he hears this gunshot. So he runs down to let other people know. They call police. They come up like 15 minutes later to look in, and they see a woman on the bed in the dark. And when they go in, she has a gunshot wound to her head. Now, looking at it, it seems like a pretty straightforward case of suicide. But no, ma'am. Here are all of the fishy things. So nowhere in the room, anywhere here, no ID, no purse, no toiletries, except I did find online that there was one bottle of men's cologne in the bathroom, but it had her prints on it.
Which doesn't matter anyway. Like, that's confusing.
It is. And it had her prints on it. So what do you do with that? There are some clothes in there, but they're only like shirts and jackets. Basically, it's like nothing for the bottom half. No underwear, no pants, nothing. And any piece of clothing that was in there had no tags.
Like they were like ripped out, right?
They were like cut out. Yeah.
Yeah.
More than anything, when you really look closely at the body itself, that's where things start to get really strange, because the way the gun was positioned, so if you're thinking about holding a gun, your pointer finger is usually like on the trigger, even if you were to hold it to yourself. But the way that she was holding it was her thumb on the trigger. And so basically all the experts were saying that with the recoil, it would have like flown out of her hand almost when the trigger was pulled.
Yeah, so I'm actually like imagining this with like my eyes closed and my hand up right now, like the recoil would almost cause you to throw the gun.
Yeah, but it's found like sitting on her lap, like she's holding it the way that they think she potentially could have shot herself, with the thumb still on the trigger on her stomach. And more than anything else, there's no blood on her hands. There is blood spatter all over this room. There isn't a single bruise. There's no soot, not a speck of blood on the hand that she supposedly held the gun with. How does that happen?
It can't.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. The other thing that they made note of was that she had this briefcase, and the only thing in the briefcase were like all of these bullets. So if you're coming to this place with the intention of taking your own life, you don't need a suitcase full of bullets to do that.
Right, you pack one.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Now, I want to say they do everything they can to ID this woman, but I don't think that that's true. They do run her fingerprints, even through Interpol, thinking maybe she's a spy because of the like cutout tags or whatever. They try and track down her family by going to the address that she gave when she registered for the motel room, but of course, it doesn't even exist. But the thing that I don't know if they did was checking the GD security cameras, which they had at the time. So like, who was she with? Was there a Lewis? Was anyone else strange moving about?
Well, and I assume they tracked down her name. Did it go anywhere?
Oh, no, of course not.
So it was a fake.
Yeah, fake name. She even like spelled it differently when she would sign it. So I don't even know what to make of that, but that's super strange.
So even if there was a Lewis, his name likely wasn't Lewis.
No way. And this is the other thing they didn't do, or at least there's no like answers on the internet of what came of it. They didn't seem to get any kind of answer from the hotel of why they did not make her show ID or give any form of payment. I don't know how this is still a mystery this many years later. Like, who checked her in? Why didn't they take it? Can we just solve that little mystery?
Jose, I guess my question is like, was it that hotel's protocol to do this and they just didn't one time? Like, which again, like you said, there's no answers. This is Unsolved Mysteries. We understand that. But if it's not protocol, it's not protocol. Okay, whatever. Weird, but whatever.
It was protocol, though. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like,
how is that not protocol? Is it so anyone can just walk in and say, like, I'll take that room, pay you later?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, especially for, again, a high-end place where you're wanting your guests to be comfortable and secure and confident in your ability to take care of them.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's something that I found that was not in the documentary that I think is uber important. So there is this guy. Obviously, they talked to, apparently not the hotel people, but they talked to the people who were like on her floor at least. And there was this guy who was in the room right across from hers. And no one knows a lot about this guy. I haven't even been able to find his name online. But here's something. When police are interviewing him, as they're talking to everyone on the floor, he says that on the morning of the 3rd, when he's checking out, the attendant at the hotel tells him that there's been a death, that this woman has taken her own life or whatever. So that's how he tells police that he heard about it. Problem is, he checked out in the morning. She wasn't actually found until the evening.
So how did they know, right?
Well, it's how did they know, but who is the they? So did the hotel staff really tell him that? And then again, they didn't take the ID, they didn't take the money. That's looking really fishy. And someone at the hotel already knew a woman would be found dead? Or did this man know that there was a woman, and as he's talking to police,
he's just like, well, the last time I was at the hotel, this is what they told me, not realizing it would kind of put him on one side or the other of things.
Yeah, he's making up a story about this death that maybe he knows about for different reasons and saying that someone told him, but not knowing that his story doesn't add up. Now, looking at what records I could find, his hotel room was right across from hers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing they brought up in the documentary was that if there was someone else in her room, they would have only had 15 minutes to get out of there before security came back up and went in. If his room was across the hall, say he was in her room, I think it'd be really easy to quickly get back there. And I mean, you can literally look through the people and see when someone's gone and just like right across.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have had hotel rooms across the hall from each other. It's like 15 seconds tops.
Right. And here's the thing. I lean a little more towards this man knowing more rather than the hotel staff, because there's one other thing. She ordered room service the day before she died.
Oh, and it wasn't like touched, right?
Well, no. So her stomach contents showed undigested food, which means that she had to have died shortly after eating this meal, not a full day later. So here's the problem too, and maybe not. Maybe I go back to thinking someone at the hotel is involved, because how are we supposed to believe the security guard story? So if she orders the food the day before, if she dies the day before, and this man somehow knows she died the day before.
How is there a gunshot 15 minutes before she's found?
Right. Now, there is something that could explain it. There was actually a second shot. Apparently, someone had shot like through the pillow, through the mattress, and like flipped the pillow over. So whether she did that or someone else did that, it was done before she was shot. I mean, I guess if she had done that, it was done before she was shot. If it was someone else, maybe they shot her the day before.
It could be whenever, right?
Yeah. But then did they make the noise and do the shot so that people would find her because people weren't finding her fast enough? The guy had already checked out at that point. I literally am spinning in circles. Now, there were a couple of other things that were found in her room that can't be explained. There was a newspaper that was actually addressed to a different room, like not the guy across the hall, but one like way down the hall.
Like she picked it up while she was walking by or something.
Well, but not her, because her fingerprints weren't on it. There was an unknown fingerprint on it that they still to this day have never been able to identify. And there was also apparently an extra comforter in her room.
Which I assume is not protocol for the hotel?
No, but here's my question. This is where I'm like, the most like basic things I feel like could have solved this case, or at least like helped solve this case earlier. Here's a question. What room was missing a comforter?
Yeah, or like, was there any sort of request from that room number for an extra comforter? Because like, you know, like there's a pull-out bed, you want an extra comforter, whatever. You would have to ask for that, or extra towels or whatever.
Yeah, it's just so messy. And again, all of the stuff I found about the undigested food, I think that's what I spiraled on the most. And this guy that maybe knew about her murder beforehand, to me, everything points to her being murdered and being murdered a full day before she was found. What that means, I have no idea. They say that like within the last couple of years that they're running this fingerprint through Interpol, but with all the advancements we have in DNA and genealogy, to me, that's the thing. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Let's figure out who she is already. . 'Cause 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 '
Okay, Ashley, this one, I honestly just can't understand the premise of how it starts. I can't. The episode is called Death Row Fugitive. So basically this guy, Lester Eubanks, he's 22 years old when he really, truly, viciously murders a 14-year-old girl. If you guys want to watch the episode, it's great, but the murder itself is described kind of in detail, and I'm not going to go into it. Even the FBI agent who was reading the statement that Lester made when he confessed to the murder said, I can't finish this. I'm not doing this. She was shot twice and didn't die right away, and he came back to finish it. It is just brutal and completely random as well. He basically just saw her walking down the street, going from one laundromat to another to get change.
Oh my God.
It's horrific.
Isn't that the most terrifying?
It really is. Like, she and her sister, their dryer broke. They go to this laundromat to finish it. It's right next door to their grandma's house. They run out of change. She's like, well, I'll just go to the next laundromat over and get change. And in like the 5-minute walk from one laundromat to another, this guy attacks her. She screams. Like, he tries to sexually assault her. He was out on bail for a previous sexual assault charge. He had a prior before that one. She screams. He shoots her, gets ready to go dancing like a monster. And when he comes back out, he's like, oh, she's not dead yet. And again, like, kills her with a brick. We're done talking about this. It's horrific. Mary Ellen Diener deserved 1,000 times better and a very full life, and he took that from her. They kind of narrow it down to him. He gets called in. He is questioned. He confesses right away, like, oh yeah, definitely I killed her. Thing is, I shot her. She didn't die, so I then went back and actually killed her. And he goes to trial, gets sentenced to death. But here's the thing. In like the 20 years since the crime to like when things kind of start going unsolved mysteries, Ohio abolishes the death penalty. So his death sentence is now a life sentence.
Okay.
Which is, okay, sure. And I don't know if this is a thing. I've never heard of it before this episode. Ashley, correct me if you know better. Have you ever heard of like very violent criminals being allowed to go on furlough to go Christmas shopping?
No. Like, I've heard of day parole, but usually that's tied to some kind of like work program.
Release. Yeah.
Yeah. When I saw that he was just like, again, somebody who you thought was bad enough to sentence to death, even if we're going to take away the death penalty, I don't think that just taking away the death penalty means you get to go Christmas shopping at the mall.
Yeah. And like, obviously this is 73. It is a very, very different time. But not only was he allowed to go Christmas shopping, they weren't even like required to stay together. Like, I've seen people who are incarcerated who are part of work release programs where they, help tear down a festival or help clean up a park or whatever. And they're always with a group and identified as incarcerated people, whatever. They're like in plain clothes, unsupervised, shopping like it's you or me in 1973. I
can't. I don't understand it.
I do not understand it. So again, they aren't required to stay in a group. They aren't required to have supervision this entire time.
I feel like when I went to the mall with my mom, I had like more supervision and requirements than this guy does.
Some of my siblings were on leashes. And so he goes off to go shopping, and they have an agreed upon place and time where they're all going to meet back together in a couple of hours and go back to prison.
Sure.
And that place is arrived at by everyone. That time is arrived at by everyone. Everyone except for Lester Eubanks. He is just gone. And at this point, like, when I'm watching this, I was like, well, what do you mean he's got, like, did he leave a half an hour ago? Did he leave 3 hours ago? Because that's the window that we're kind of looking at. Like, you have no idea how far to the wind this guy could be at this point because you haven't been watching him since you dropped him off.
Because you just let him go wherever he wanted without any I cannot understand how this happened.
Neither can I. And it just, again, the whole premise of the story just baffles me because, I mean, he's in plain clothes. He's unsupervised in a public place. And on top of that, like, after he goes missing, he goes on the run. He's not missing, he's on the run. They go back to like, oh, like, I wonder who he was talking to, like, in the days and weeks leading up to this. His visitor roster in prison is massive. Like, family members, acquaintances, there's tons of people. So they're thinking, did someone help him? Was there an assist? Was he already planning this with someone? But the list is so long, they can't even really pinpoint anyone.
Also, like, who has that many friends? I don't have that many friends.
And I have like 7, and half of them are, actually all of them are audio truck employees.
Like, who's that cool? How can that many people be friends with such a monster?
Yeah, yeah. So police think that, someone on his visitor roster must have helped him, because there's no way this guy could just like disappear from a mall. And I'm like, well, if you leave him alone for 3 hours, maybe.
Yeah.
So there's a local warrant that goes out, and the FBI also get involved, and they issue a national warrant, which means that if he interacts with any law enforcement in any sort of routine stop, that it'll be flagged. Now, again, this is the 70s, so like it'll be flagged in like 3 days, in my opinion.
Right.
So that's it. 73, he's gone. No one hears from him. No one knows where he is. 20 years later, an officer in Ohio, which is where he was incarcerated and where the crime happened, he's a captain now, and he's like, I wonder if this guy was ever caught, and they just never told us, because like we had a local warrant out, but it's the FBI, like they're hotshots, right? Maybe they just were like, Ohio doesn't need to know yet.
Yeah.
And so he like pulls it up, and the FBI warrant wasn't there.
Stop. It's been so long since I watched this one, I didn't remember.
Yeah. So when the FBI is interviewed in the documentary, they're like, the only thing we can chalk it up to is a clerical error. There's no reason for this to have ever happened. We don't know where the warrant went. But the captain in Ohio is like, we don't know when this even happened. Yes, people were looking for him early on, but we don't know when they stopped because the warrant wasn't there.
A clerical error.
He could have been pulled over every other month in his car, for all we know. And it's never raised any red flags because the FBI warrant, the national warrant that goes to the entire United States,
oh my goodness,
was possibly not in effect. Like, yes, it could have been deleted a week before the captain went looking for it.
Highly unlikely.
It also could have been deleted a week after it was issued. We have no idea how long this warrant was completely inactive. So he like calls the FBI and he's like, this is an issue. Can you prove that this guy is anywhere else? And they're like, nope, he's nowhere. So the FBI warrant gets reissued. And a year later, a woman comes forward and she's like, I was actually married to this guy's cousin, and this guy lived with us.
Oh my gosh.
So she had married this guy's cousin. He had gotten killed, and she had started like corresponding with Lester Eubanks when he was in prison, pen paling, writing back and forth. They didn't really go into like what those conversations were, but she had built this relationship with him, and he ended up, when he first escaped, going up to Michigan and hiding out for a while to see like, well, like, it's a state over. Like, if they're going to find me soon, they'll find me here. He works some odd jobs, paints houses, and gets up enough money to take a bus to California to meet up with this woman. And on his way, as they're crossing into California, the bus that he's on gets stopped by police officers. And he's like, this is it. Like,
Oh, I remember this, yeah.
They figured it out. They know I'm here. Like, the jig is up. We're done. And the police officers go through the bus, they go through every seat, they come to him, and they turn around and leave.
Mm-hmm.
The police officers were looking for illegal fruits and vegetables going into the state, and not a convicted child murderer who was on the loose.
Unreal.
And so, like, he thought he was going to get caught, and then he lives, in California with this woman for a few years, and then kind of disappears again. Just, again, to the wind. Like, it's like he just, in thin air, poof, gone. And at this point, like, the investigation is kind of ramping up. People are still looking for him, especially because God knows how long they haven't been looking for him. And they eventually get around to his dad, who is like his only living relative left. And, the FBI come by, and his dad's like, I'll tell you anything you want, but we aren't talking about Lester, which is the only reason that the FBI are there.
We're not here to, like, hang.
Yeah, like, we aren't, like, watching a movie. We want to know where your fugitive son is. And the dad's like, you know what? I believe he started a new life and he's doing just fine. And the FBI officers were like, and you know exactly where he is and you aren't going to tell us. Okay, cool. Perfect. Thanks. But a friend of the dad was like, well, I was over there a couple days ago and he got a call and he said it was his son in Alabama. So now we're looking in Alabama, which is, again, like across the country. Like, we're going back and forth at this point. And they find that the number that had called from Alabama to the dad multiple times was from like a residential care facility for teens. And there was a man who had worked there that met the description of Lester.
No.
Well, yes, but by the time the FBI got to this residential facility, the janitor had quit.
Of course.
So that's kind of where the episode ends, is like, we still don't know where this guy is. There's a bunch of age-progressed photos of him because no one has confirmed seen him. There are no pictures after 1973 when he went missing on that Christmas shopping trip. But ABC has done a podcast on this, which, full disclosure, I have not listened to, but I've read about it, and they've done a couple articles as well. It's called Have You Seen This Man? And in the articles that I've read, evidently a potential biological son has come forward to provide DNA evidence.
Oh.
So he believes that his mom was sexually assaulted and raped by Lester Eubanks. And he...
Oh, so it's not like his mom was like in a relationship with him.
No, like...
Oh my.
His mom was a victim of Lester. And he believes that Lester was the assailant and that he is the product of that rape.
Oh my.
So he has volunteered his DNA, and I believe it's being analyzed. But here's the thing that I actually didn't know, and maybe Ashley, you did. Did you know that the FBI's protocol is to exclude familial DNA to find suspects?
Wait, what do you mean?
So like what we see from Parabon and GEDmatch and stuff, the FBI doesn't use that unless it's provided by one of those companies.
Wait, I'm so confused.
So like they won't take his DNA and match it in the FBI system.
The FBI won't take the son's DNA.
Will not take the son's DNA to try to find Lester.
Oh. So wait, what system is the FBI using? They have something of like their own?
It kind of seems like that. I couldn't quite get, like, all the articles that I read were like, the FBI declined interviews with their like genealogist specialist, which I'm like, well, of course they did. So it was always a little bit cagey when it came to describing it, but basically like...
You know what? My podcasting lives are coming full circle because this is actually, in something that makes no sense is making sense to me. I'm working on another mini series all about Austin Yoga Shop and like deep dive investigative series with 2 journalists. And one of the big questions we have is, if anyone hasn't like seen the updates, is they have DNA, right? This like 5th man, like, quote unquote.
Right. We covered it in a headlines episode.
Yeah. So FBI says it hit on someone, but the FBI won't say who. And what we can't even get from the FBI is no one can give us a straight answer as to like, I'm not saying tell us who it is, but I'm saying like, can you explain to me what system you have and what you're working with on your end that even you aren't willing to give us? Or like, what database are you working with? Is it an internal one? Where are you gathering data from? And they're like super, they will not talk about it. Where the heck are they getting this DNA from?
I was like, that's kind of like what the articles were kind of saying. Like, we can't even get an answer. All we know is that based on the statement that they gave us after we requested to talk to a DNA specialist from the FBI, and they declined, their statement is like, we don't use familial DNA. End story. Like, what? And like, on one hand, I'm like, okay, that's one thing. But also, we don't even know for sure that this guy is a match. Like, we don't even know if he is biological to Lester Eubanks. So even if he did submit his DNA and it was analyzed, it could also bring up completely random people that are not Lester.
Man, this DNA stuff is getting messy quick.
Yeah. So
he's just like still out there. How old would he be now?
So Lester would actually be 76 by now. So the time for him to, remain in prison, if/when he's ever caught, is probably dwindling. And the fact that he's been free since 1973.
Never had to really like serve.
Yeah, like
time.
The crime happened in 1965 and he was out by 73. He has suffered a portion, a fraction of what he should have for the horrendous things he did to Mary Ellen.
Obviously, we have this other young man who believes that he is the product of a sexual assault and Lester's his father. But, I mean, they obviously have his DNA. Has he been connected to anything else, anywhere else in the country ever?
I mean, not that I can find. Again, he had 2 priors before murdering Mary Ellen, and he came clean to murdering Mary Ellen really quickly. So afterwards, as far as I know, he hasn't been connected to anything else. But also, like, this is a predator. This is someone who was acting viciously even before his murder conviction. Like, I refuse to believe that he has been dormant since 1973. Okay, Ashley, I'm going to be really honest before starting this next story. This is like my least favorite kind of unsolved mystery.
Well, I agree. I actually like this episode the least as well, but I will reward your least favorite story with, as soon as you're done, I will tell you my, like, any Unsolved Mysteries all-time favorite, because the next one I have for you is insane. So let's power through.
Okay. So the reason that I don't like this is because I don't think it's a mystery. Like, this is very much where you and I differ. Like, I know Unsolved Mysteries is like our like Venn diagram overlap, but I'm way more America's Most Wanted, like my last story, and you tend a little bit more supernatural, and this is like in between those two.
Fair.
So the whole story starts in like the northeast region of Japan in this little like port town. And on March 11th, 2011, there's this huge earthquake. And like they're used to earthquakes. They have them like not frequently, but like there's been some big ones in the past. But this was the biggest. And when you live in a coast town on an island, you know that earthquakes usually mean tsunamis. So as soon as the earthquake happens, they're like, okay, let's evacuate everyone out of here. There will be a tsunami. We just don't know like when it's coming or how big it will be. Turns out it is devastating. And Ashley, I know it's probably been a while since you watched this episode. Do you remember the footage?
Barely. I mean, I just remember literally waves like taking over the entire, like just wiping it out in one swoop.
It's almost impossible to even describe because there are like buildings that are breaking down because of the earthquake. There's buildings that are on fire from the earthquake. And then there is a wave that's just enveloping the entire land. Buildings are being swept away while they're on fire, while they're like being destroyed. Like it's
unreal.
It's unreal. And like,
it looks like full on like end times footage.
Yeah. It's like if you were to spill a cup of water on your table, but in slow motion, except it's a city. I can't even describe it any other way, to be honest. And actually like the maximum height of the tsunami was over 130 feet, which is like a lot. And then on top of that, one of the talking heads in the documentary is like, we couldn't figure out why nature was turning against us because it started snowing like
I forgot
stop.
that.
So you have an earthquake, then you have this massive tsunami literally just gobbling up the entire city, and then it's snowing, like blizzard level snows.
I literally, it's been a long time since our church days, but I think if that was happening, I'd be like, Book of Revelations, it's happening.
Yeah, we're done. Like, okay, anytime Jesus on a white horse, he'll be here.
I laugh sometimes because I know that even though I'm not like deeply ingrained in the church anymore, that like it's ingrained in me, because even if
it happened again, you'd still think it.
Well, okay, here's the funny thing. You have to tell me if you do this too, but like anytime I can't find anyone, there's always...
Oh, the rapture happened.
Yes, there's always this half second where like...
We got left behind.
I got left behind.
Yeah, so I
would not handle this well.
Yeah, I mean, even watching the footage, like, again, as much as this wasn't like my kind of unsolved mystery, this was a very devastating episode for me just because of like the sheer like magnitude of this tragedy. And like they even show towards the end of the documentary, like 8 years after this happened, when this whole documentary was filmed, the area is almost uninhabited. It's taken almost a decade to even get to a point where this place can be lived in again. And again, like I took a lot of notes on the devastation because it's massive. And some of the stories that were told are just devastating. Like one guy lost basically his entire family in one day and didn't even know it for weeks. Like the day after, he found his one daughter in like a bamboo grove, and his wife was found like a couple miles away. And he didn't even find his baby, his youngest daughter, until a couple weeks later, going through the debris of his house. And like to lose everybody in your family in one day and not know it for weeks, I cannot imagine like processing that. Like I can't, like, how do you keep living not knowing? Which I guess we say a lot about missing persons cases in general, but like after a travesty like this, like they could be somewhere. They actually could very easily be in a shelter or being taken care of someone who found them. Or trapped somewhere. And like, okay, sorry, I have to move on. So all this devastation, and there are thousands dead. Thousands. Like the confirmed dead as of the documentary was 15,854, with over 2,500 still missing. And like this is not all of Japan. This is a region,
teeny tiny, area
of Japan. Like this is not like we're not talking about a huge country that is losing this amount of people. We're talking about a very small area. of a country that's losing this much of their population. And because of that high amount, like the survivors couldn't even have like a traditional funeral or grieving process. And in Japan, it's very traditional to cremate the dead. And because of the devastation, the crematoriums literally weren't even up and running. So they built these mass burial sites. And it's devastating to watch these people mourn their loved ones because this is not how they ever expected to do it. One, after a tragedy, and two, in this very non-traditional way that is almost, to a certain extent, like disrespectful of the dead. And I think a lot of what happens in this documentary is because of how they had to handle the deaths of the people in this region. And after all of this, like 3 months later, this journalist starts hearing these weird reports out of this region that there are ghosts around.
What?
Yeah. So one of the first stories they tell is this guy it's like while all of this is happening, he's looking for his mom and he heard that she might be at the shelter where she was safe. So he goes there, he's waiting to see if like they have her. He's talked to the attendants and they're like, well, wait here. And while he's waiting, he sees this woman sitting in a chair across the room. And he's like, oh, I think my mom has that shirt. And like, he goes over and she turns around and it's his mom. And he's obviously incredibly relieved and pulls out his camera to take a picture of her to send to his family members so that they know that she's safe. And he holds the camera up to his face, takes a picture. And when he takes the camera down, it's not his mom.
Like no one's there or it's someone else?
Completely different person. And in fact, at that time, when the tsunami hit, his mom was actually in a bus on the other side of town and had already died by the time he took this picture.
Weird.
And there's another story, which as the parent of a toddler, I find incredibly creepy because it's kind of happened to me before, even though my toddler is still here. But there was a parent of a little boy who died. And out of habit, after the tsunami happened a couple of weeks or months later, she was getting dinner ready and called out for her son that dinner was ready, which is just devastating in and of itself. But when she did that, one of his toys that had a manual switch turned on.
I don't like that.
I've had motion sensing toys in my house and they're terrifying, and now I don't buy them. But this was like a manual switch toy. And she had basically lost her entire will to live after she lost him in the tsunami. And this really encouraged her that like he was saying, I'm still here. I'm watching over you. I care about you. And it really like changed her perspective. And she like respected this toy then because her son's spirit was speaking through it. And there's a priest in this that plays a really large part of the documentary named Tayo Kaneda. And he's like a 26th generation monk, which is amazing. He's one of my favorite people in this entire documentary. And he actually goes out of his way to describe the way that Japanese people view life and death, in that it's almost not separate. Like when you die, you aren't dead in the sense that especially Americans like would consider it.
Okay.
It's just like you aren't here. You're gone, but like your shadow still exists. Like it's very spiritual. And because of that, the idea of processing your grief or like moving on from your grief feels more like ignoring and forgetting the one you lost versus like addressing your own personal like emotions around it. So because of that, like they kind of see this huge uptick in ghost sightings. Like there's one lady who just sees ghosts. Like she's always been kind of spiritually connected like that is the way she describes it. And she'll see ghosts and be like, hey, just so you know, you're dead. You have a place. It's not here. And then they go away. And there's also this weird phenomenon of like taxi drivers. Do you remember this part at all?
Not at all.
Oh my gosh. This one is fascinating to me because of the compassion and the spook factor. So one, there's a bunch of stories of taxi drivers like pulling up and like picking up a person and they say, you know, go to this destination. And so they go to this destination and when they get there, the taxi driver turns around and the person is gone.
Not to take this back to the lady in Oslo, but this is why you get payment up front.
I mean, true. And that's where I come in with the compassion. So the meters were running for this. So this is kind of why a lot of people in this documentary consider these like the most founded ideas of ghosts appearing, because there's no reason for these taxi drivers to be taking these fares with no one in them.
Right. And it's not like they're seeing a loved one or like manifesting it themselves.
Right. Like they're just completely random people going to completely random destinations. And when they get to the destination, their passenger has vanished. And the compassion comes in is because like, well, like someone has to pay for these. And the taxi drivers are paying for them themselves.
They're paying for the ghosts?
Yeah. They consider it like a service, like an honor to create this sense of peace for the spirit by returning them to their homes, which like at this point, I'm weeping in the documentary.
I love that.
So there's no reason for them to be lying about it because it's literally costing them money.
I want to see a ghost so bad.
I know you do. And like, I'm not and this is probably why I didn't love this episode. I'm not a huge ghost person.
Like you don't believe they're real or you just don't want to see one?
I don't want to see one. I'm TBD on if they're real. I think they are. Have I ever told you my ghost story?
No.
Oh my God. So guys, this is our first time ever. So when I was 12 or 13, my uncle died and I was very, very close to him, very close to his kids and my aunt. And he ran a restaurant in my hometown and he died actually in the restaurant from a spontaneous brain aneurysm when he was 40. Very, very unexpected, very traumatic for my family. We eventually closed the restaurant a year or two after he died and auctioned everything off. But we spent a lot of time there, like getting it ready to sell and selling stock and selling, items or whatever. And part of that was like, it was kind of like an old house. Like, Ashley, you know what I'm talking about. But it was kind of like an old house style. So it had like a main floor with most of the dining room. There was some dining upstairs and some banquet halls upstairs. And one time me and my sister were working, we were like just dusting around, getting ready for a sale. And we heard like a whole bunch of knocks. We couldn't figure out where they were coming from.
Stop.
And we were like, well, that's kind of weird. Like it's an old building, so whatever. And we just kept hearing them. And we were like, that's not really knocks. It's really more like footsteps. And so we kind of walked around the building and it was just her and I there. And we walked around the building and we kind of figured out where in the upper level that it was. And because we were like baby Nancy Drews, I was like, okay, I'm going to go up the stairs in here. And Courtney, you go outside and go up the stairs. Like there was an off entrance to the upstairs on the outside.
Find the grandfather clock. The answers are always in the grandfather clock.
Exactly. So I was like, okay, you go upstairs from the outside and I'll go upstairs from the inside. And like, if there's someone here, I don't know what we're going to do, but we'll catch them.
That you're like 12 and 8 and you're going to figure it out.
13 and 11. Thank you very much. But we're like, okay, like we'll just find whoever this is. And when we both got upstairs, we realized that when we had pinpointed where the steps were coming from, it was his office.
Is that he died in his office?
He didn't die in his office, but he spent almost all the time there. And like
Weird.
It still smelled like him. Like it was a very surreal experience.
Right, there's totes ghosts.
So that's my ghost story. I didn't see one. I'm pretty sure I heard one.
Totes ghosts.
And I still didn't really love this episode. So going back to our priest, Reverend Canetta, he also would do like, I hate to use the word exorcism because they don't use it in the documentary, but that's kind of how I viewed it. Basically, this woman comes to his house and she's like, I can feel people inside of me and I can't make it stop. They're dead, they're spirits, and I can't get them out. And so he performs this like very long, extensive prayer service with her and like basically coaxes these spirits out of her. And it happens over and over and over again. And there's this like terrible story about she has a spirit of this little girl who was running with her little brother away from the waves. And he says, sis, I can't keep going. And she lets go of his hand.
Stop.
And she also died, but she feels unrest. Essentially, her spirit is unrestful because she thinks she could have done more. And the priest's wife basically comes in and is like the mom and forgives her. And the spirit leaves this woman. It's so wild. And a lot of people are like in the documentary and in articles around it is like, why here? Why? Like,
yeah,
there have been tragedies around the world, let alone like also in Japan. Why?
Even like mass burials and stuff. So you can't even say it's the fact that they weren't put to rest the way that they traditionally are.
Or would prefer to be, right. And so a lot of people come back to the fact that this is a pretty rural region of Japan, and their spirituality is also kind of tied to a sort of mysticism. So they're just like more open to that fact. And again, like the priest describes this as almost a veil. Like it can be so thin at times that if you believe, you can see it. And there's even like an academic who's like, I don't believe in ghosts, so I'll never see one. I'm not their type, which is kind of like where I land.
Yeah, sure. I think it's opposite though. Like I'm like trying so hard. I'm almost like too desperate for them. They're like, no.
And, something that the priest said I thought was really interesting was, these ghosts aren't here to scare you. They are here because they worry about you or the people still left among the living, and they long for that connection. And all you have to do is just remind them that they're no longer here. This isn't their home, but they do have a place to go, and to not worry about us because we're here in this realm doing fine. Go to your realm and find rest. I will come back to, I don't know what the mystery in this episode is, other than like, are ghosts real, which is a pretty broad mystery.
Yeah, I don't recall a ton of ghost stuff in the OG. Like, I get on board more with like the UFO rather than ghosts. And there was like a lot of that I remember. I mean, even in the last installment, we had a UFO thing. Doesn't seem like a mystery. I think it's just saying like, hey, there's stuff that we don't understand about passing on.
Yeah.
Next episode? Okay.
Okay, let's hear it.
Lady in the Lake is, even before I did my online research, this was one that I watched a couple of times because I was so fascinated by it.
You would.
I know. Of the 6, this is the one I was drawn to.
This is my kind of unsolved mystery.
Yes.
Let's be clear.
Because here's the thing it is a mystery that is unsolved, but like I think all the pieces are there, and it's one of those where I think it's like pretty obvious what happened. Mm-hmm. All right. So Joanne Matuk Romaine, she's this mother of 3 adult children, recently separated from her husband. And when her daughters asked about, the separation, she's just like, it wasn't a healthy marriage. My mom left. She wanted to be happy, like the end.
Everyone was better off.
Yeah. So one night in January 2010, this is in Michigan, Joanne's 2 daughters are at home. They actually lived with their mom, and the police show up, like at their door at like 9-something at night. One of the daughters says she looks down at her phone. It's 9:24 because she's like, you look at your phone when the police show up. You like, that's just natural.
Okay, so she's a crime junkie. Cool.
Exactly. So they say, hey, we found your mom's car at the church abandoned, and she's missing. Now, mind you, like, mom had gone to church at like 7 p.m., so she hasn't been missing very long. So they're like on it.
Yeah, just like a couple of hours.
Yeah. And as soon as they hear that their mom's missing, well, they start calling her like over and over again, like any of us would do. Like, this has to be a mistake. She has to be somewhere. She'll pick up the phone for me. So they both keep calling. No answer, no answer, no answer. So they go out to the church. They're like, we want to see the car. This isn't making sense. Like, we're just going to go there. When they show up, there's a full-on police search. Like, we are talking, it is taped off with crime scene tape. There is a helicopter that's like looking in the water. There's Coast Guard. There's police everywhere.
It's like scary level of missing at this point.
Exactly. They are searching, and there's nothing. And what the police are telling them at the scene is like, listen, your mom took her own life. Your mom was at church. She walked across the street to this body of water, walked into the water, and drowned herself. And they have all of these search parties. They're like, we're going to find her. They call in everyone, but no one is having luck. When they look at like the evidence that's still there at the scene, what they see are like some weird scuffle, or like not even scuffle, but like these shoe slide prints like towards the water, which is where they think that she went in. It's kind of like this steep embankment, and she was wearing heels. And it's interesting to note that inside her car, they also find her purse. So she left it in there. And to them, that's even more of a sign of like, she didn't need to take her purse with her.
She was walking away, right?
Yeah. But it's worth noting that the purse was brand new, at least according to her daughters, and a big chunk of it was like ripped on the side. And they said they had never seen it like that. So their assumption is that it had happened that day. So because they can't find her right away in the immediate vicinity, they start trying to track her last movements. And what they find out is that she filled up her gas tank right before going to this like short prayer service at her church. And then again, just like poof, she's gone. Now, there are some other people that were at that service that night. I mean, it was like a handful of people, not a lot. But what they learn is that when this thing gets out, this one person comes out and they say that this alarm starts going off, this car alarm. And so they turn, they see a Lexus. That is the same car that Joanne would have drove. So we believe it's her car that the alarm is going off right when service gets out. Well, then the last person to leave the church is this woman. And she said, like, it's dark. You know, it's winter, so it gets dark early. It's dark. She's like looking around, full crime junkie, like, be weird, be rude, know your surroundings, stay alive. And she's like glancing across everywhere in the parking lot. She sees nothing, no cars.
So no Lexus.
No Lexus. But Joanne's car is eventually found at the church parking lot. So whether it was Joanne, whether something else happened, at some point,
the car was moved.
At least based on witness statements. But that's not what the police are saying. They don't believe that happened. I think they, say witnesses can be inconsistent. Maybe she just didn't see the car. Because in no part of the police's theory does Joanne leave and come back. She leaves church and then just decides to take her own life.
So wasn't the car found in a different parking place than when it initially was there, or maybe in the wrong direction?
It's possible. I think that if I remember correctly, I think they were kind of insinuating that in the documentary.
Yeah.
It was facing a weird direction, but I couldn't find enough for my supplemental research to really give me a good grasp. Basically all I know is that I don't think it was there at some point, and then I think it was again. And if it's facing a different direction, I think that helps bolster that theory.
Oh, for sure.
The other thing that is worth noting is there are no prints on the car, which is strange, right? There should be prints.
Super, super strange. Not even anything.
Yeah. And they didn't do any testing for DNA. And I'm not 100% sure why. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they just didn't. But
I mean, they were also chalking it up to her taking her own life. So
True.
Why would you even look for that if you had that resolution in your mind already?
So in the days following her disappearance, they're still not finding her. Now, they know in the documentary, and I think it is interesting, she was wearing all black. The water was icy and blue and white. So she would have stuck out, but they're not finding her. But even without finding her, they rule it a death, they rule it a suicide, and they rule it a drowning, which is a little strange because there's no current in this water. Interestingly, she would have had to walk out. I think they said it was the length of 2 football fields. The water was so shallow. To even get deep water, she'd be walking in water for the length of 2 football fields.
Which is dedication in Michigan in winter, let me tell you.
Yes.
So does she have any history of depression?
No history of depression. There are even letters that her family and attorneys have gotten from her doctors saying that she was happy. She didn't have any known mental illnesses.
There were no indicators that she would attempt to take her own life.
And she was never at any point, at least that they were aware of, suicidal. But it is important to point out that in the days, weeks, maybe even months before her death, she was really paranoid. She thought she was being followed. She thought her phone was tapped. She even looked into getting private security. And a lot of people use that to try and say she was mentally ill and, she was paranoid. But her daughters point out, it's one thing to say that, but when you're afraid for your life and you think something's going to happen to you, and then you go missing and something happens to you, it's less likely that you're crazy and
more likely that you're right.
Yes, and more likely that you had a reason to be scared.
Okay, but I guess what was she paranoid about, right?
Right. So this comes up when her daughter Michelle is talking about how there's 3 people that she initially thought could have had something to do with her mom's disappearance. She said the first was the ex-husband, right? They had just recently separated.
I mean, that's the go-to, right?
Yeah, wasn't a good relationship, kind of contentious. Second was Joanne's brother. He actually used to be super wealthy. I mean, multi-millionaire, had successful businesses, was down on his luck, had maybe some gambling debts, and they're wondering if someone used Joanne to get back at him. But the first person on Michelle's list, and the person she said, she was specifically afraid of this person, this is what all the paranoia was about, was her cousin. Now, this guy's name is Tim. Tim is a detective, And apparently there was like this big feud going on with the family over this wine business that their parents had left them when they passed away. I mean, like lawyers were involved. Everyone was going after this big chunk of money. And Michelle, Joanne's daughter, had overheard a conversation where her mom's like yelling on the phone with Tim. She can't hear the other end of it. She doesn't know exactly what they're fighting about, but her mom gets off the phone, looks terrified, and is like, if anything ever happens to me.
Tim did it.
Tim did it. Now, of those 3 people, everyone's officially ruled out, not only because they ruled it a suicide, but they like find that either, they had alibis or whatever, but especially Tim, like he's cleared by police because at the time his police colleagues vouch for him and say that he was on duty.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward 70 days after she goes missing, her body is found in Canada. No one has any idea how it got there. Now, there is a waterway to connect where Joanne supposedly went in and where she was found, but it doesn't make sense because, again, there were no currents. No one can figure out how she would have gotten all that way. And if she did, everyone expected her body to be in really bad condition. Like, her clothes were intact. Her shoes actually look like, it's like normal wear and tear. It doesn't make sense that those didn't get scuffed up.
But she would have been in the water for over 2 months, right?
Yes. So I saw this one video on the Justice for Joanne Machouk Romaine Facebook page. And it was really interesting. They said that when Canadian authorities found her and they called the department where they knew she lived to like let them know like, hey, this matches your missing person. I guess the case had initially gotten transferred to like another department, but the one that they called like hurried up and went up to Canada, immediately told the police like there that, oh, this is a suicide. This woman was mentally ill. Like we got it from here, even though they didn't have the case. And why are you saying this woman was mentally ill? And we don't know that. Like, yes, you ruled it a suicide, but because we had nothing else.
Right, right.
So they do end up doing an autopsy. They do officially rule it a suicide, but they rule it a suicide by dry drowning. Have you ever heard of that?
I have, only because I'm a mom and it can happen to little kids.
I don't understand it. So they're basically saying that she drowned, but there's no water in her lungs.
Mm-hmm.
How?
I still don't understand it, but it definitely still makes me nervous around pools and my kids.
Like, the way I understood it with kids is that they could swallow so much water that, like...
later on, they can then basically drown themselves.
Yeah, but there would still be water there.
Yeah, it's...
right?
It's bizarre. I don't understand it specifically in this case, especially.
And when I think about that even more, it's when you drown, a lot of people, I think, when they're searching for her, they're like, oh, well, you don't float right away. That's when, like, all the gases after you're dead for a while, like, build up in your body. You actually sink right away.
Mm-hmm.
You sink if your lungs are filled with water. If her lungs are filled with air, I don't even think she would have sunk right away.
Right.
So if they were there with, like, she gets out of church at 7:15, they're notifying her daughters at like 9:24.
Which means that they would have at least known for, like a half an hour minimum, if not longer?
Yeah, she's not going to get to Canada in 2 hours. How did they not find her?
Especially without a current. She's not going anywhere.
Yes. And there's just, oh my gosh, there's so much more that Netflix left out. Again, I got this from the Justice for Joanne Machouk Romaine Facebook page. Click on Detroit News did an incredible special, and the Grosse Pointe News. But before I jump in, the one thing I also wanted to point out that they did point out in the Netflix documentary is just the geography of this. So if you hear this and you're like, oh, she was parked at the church and walked across to this body of water, she had to walk across 2 busy lanes of traffic and a median and go down this like ice-covered concrete, like slanted slab. Nothing about that to me makes sense either. Like, right? Or am I just like reading too much into this?
I haven't watched this episode recently, but didn't they even have someone like in heels try to make like this precarious walk down the embankment?
In the summer, and she couldn't even walk. Like, someone had to hold her hands and she almost broke her ankle like 3 times.
Yeah, so doing it covered in ice, like I do not have an embankment anywhere near my house. My sidewalk is still covered with ice and I can barely make it down there to like get the mail.
Yeah.
In like snow boots.
Okay, so we can all agree, this is why I watched this episode twice. Like, It doesn't make sense. Nothing is adding up. Something is going on here. So then I start to Google.
Okay, here we go.
And through all of the sources I just mentioned, here's what I found out. So first of all, things didn't end like quite like her daughter said. It wasn't just like, oh, we're not happy, time to move on. There are allegations that her husband had an affair with her best friend. Yeah.
Justin and Eric would never.
They better not. So, not that, again, that doesn't mean he did it, but it's just one of those things that got left out and casts a whole different shadow.
It's like, oh, interesting tidbit that we didn't know before. Cool.
Mm-hmm. And additionally, when she got off the phone that one time after arguing with her cousin, she tells her daughter, if something happens to me, it was Tim. She doesn't just tell her daughter that. She told at least 11 people that before her death, that she was terrified of Tim. And if something happened to her, if she disappeared, look at Tim. 11 people. Are you kidding me?
I mean, it's one thing to be like, I'm going to tell, like, okay, my sister.
The person who heard me yelling on the phone.
My best friend. Maybe one other person who, like, lives out of state just so that they have some distance. But that's it.
Mm-hmm.
11? Again, going back to, like, how many people we were even friends with. I don't even know 11 people.
Yeah, and it's just scary that you can, like, what do you have to do? Like, film yourself saying it? You can tell 11 people and then something happens to you and everyone looks the other way. And to kind of, like, support this idea that it was, something happened to her at the hands of someone she knew, her daughter said that she didn't go anywhere alone. Like, in those final weeks, she was so terrified for her life that the only place that she felt safe alone was at church. So it almost makes me think...
Which, if you were following her, you would know.
Mm-hmm. Or if you knew her well enough, you would know. Something else Unsolved Mysteries left out is that right after Joanne goes missing, this guy came forward. He was an eyewitness who says that he saw 2 men and a woman matching Joanne's description down by the water around the time that she goes missing. And, like, literally, he's like, I got a good look at the guy. He, like, one of the guys at least, he, like, waved me on. And he later identifies one of the men as her cousin, Tim.
What?
Yes, but police are like, oh, that guy's just not credible.
Well, I don't have words. I'm sorry. Why? What?
Mm-hmm.
How?
And there was also a man seen, like, running in the area at the time wearing a scarf. That scarf is found on the road. To me, seems like a big piece of evidence that should be tested.
Yeah.
Police just gave it to charity.
Oh,
Yeah?
what?
Yeah. And this is the most concerning of freaking all.
I would, like, back up. Do police just, like, give evidence in general to Goodwill?
To charity?
I love thrifting. You know me. I live for Goodwill, Salvation Army situation. Was this in evidence at one point in time?
I've never, in all of my crime junkie years, heard about someone. I've heard of destroying evidence.
Or, like, pitching it, getting rid of it, contaminating it, whatever. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Charity?
Charity.
Oh.
So.
Okay.
Buckle up, because it's about to get weirder.
My thrift store days have changed, I'll tell you that.
The most concerning thing in all of this is the timeline. So I want to walk you through it, because I remember watching the documentary, and I remember, the daughters talk about coming to this crime scene. I'm like, oh my God, how terrible that must have been.
How can you? Yeah, I can imagine.
But it's not until you stop and think about it that you're like, we're 2 hours out.
Why is she considered missing?
Yeah. And she wasn't reported missing. When would this have happened? I mean, how many cases have we done where no one can get anyone to pay attention?
Literally, the If I Go Missing episode is about someone who went missing safely.
And no one cared.
And no one cared. And she was found 8 days later. 8 days, kind of on accident.
So listen to this. That night, we know she's at church at 8:58 p.m. So this is like a little while after, like, she would have left, right?
Mm-hmm.
A police officer runs her tags. We don't know why. I assume it's because it's like this lone car sitting in a parking lot. You just want to make sure it's nothing nefarious.
Right.
And the officer runs the tags and marks down, like, no action necessary. So there's, it's not a stolen car. There's no warrants. Someone just left it here. We'll come back in a few days. If it's still here, then we'll worry about it.
Yeah, like maybe someone met here and picked the other person up, whatever.
Exactly. Then at 9:58, another officer comes by he runs the plates, and his story is that he sees some footprints leading to the water. He's sure that whoever had this car must have taken their own life. And so he is the one that like sets in motion this missing person rescue mission.
Okay, so Officer 1, nothing weird. Officer 2, something's up here. Even though it's in a church parking lot where there was just a service and there's probably lots of footprints, right?
Even if, I don't know exactly what the parking lot looked like. I mean, in my mind, it could have even been shoveled. But going back to the geography of this, even if there were footprints, you're telling me you tracked footprints from the parking lot, crossed one lane of traffic, crossed a median, crossed another lane of traffic. And by the way, they're not like in-depth footprints. It's like literally like a shuffly area down to the water. And you're like, oh, whoever had this car must have taken their own life?
Definitely seems like a big conclusion to jump to.
Okay, so here is another problem with this. Even if you want to say like, he's just the cop we all wish we had on our case. Like he's just paying so much attention. You know,
he's so diligent, et cetera, et cetera.
858 is the no action plate running. 958 is the she's missing plate running. So between 858 and 958, we don't know that anything's wrong, right?
But also things have wildly escalated.
But riddle me this. Why do the police show up at Joanne's house at 9:24?
I forgot about that timestamp.
And tell her daughters that she's missing. And you can say what the police are trying to say is that like, oh, we didn't go there till later. Okay, but we have the phone records from Joanne's phone that show calls from her daughters, 9:29, 9:29, 9:31, 9:34, 9:49.
Immediately after the cops show up and they are going into like high alert panic mode.
So somehow they knew to tell her daughter she was missing. Oh, and this is the other thing her daughter said. Her daughter said the car was registered in her name, the daughter, Michelle.
So she would have been considered, quote unquote, missing, not her mom.
Yes. And the Coast Guard, the report that they gave the family's lawyers says that the Coast Guard was called in for a search at 9:53. This is 5 minutes before the second officer even runs the plates.
Oh my God.
Now, the Coast Guard thing is like all like typed up or whatever, like you would expect.
I feel like the Coast Guard is like typing this up and they're like, here you go. Please get this off my plate.
The police have a handwritten report that's like, oh no, we didn't call them till 10:20. So here's the thing. All of this, basically what Joanne's family believes is that there is a cover-up. Tim worked for the police. They're alleging that he had something to do with it, and the good old boys in blue helped him out. They hired a lawyer to make this case, and that's where all the deposition video that you see from the Netflix documentary comes from. And as you saw at the end, like, again, they left out so many of these, like, things that to me are jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
They left all of it out, but the case gets thrown out, and I don't understand how.
Honestly, that's the unsolved mystery for me.
It is! You have one handwritten report that says you called it, none of this adds up, and I can't even imagine what Joanne's family has to be feeling. Like, I would be screaming from the rooftops. I want to pull all of my hair out, just like the frustration, the tiny frustration I feel on their behalf. I don't understand.
Okay, well, I think you're about to burst a blood vessel. So
I am.
Maybe we should move on to the last episode of the season. Okay, last episode of the season is Stolen Kids. And it takes place in 1989 in Harlem in New York City. And this little 2-year-old named Christopher Dansby, he also goes by Juju, which I think is freaking adorable. He goes to the park with his mom and his grandma and his auntie, and they're just kind of like hanging out. It's a really regular occurrence. It's a park really, really close to the apartment that they live in. And he and his brother love playing there. His brother's a little bit older than him. And a really normal thing to do is, like, while they're all at the park, one of the grown-ups will go to the store, pick up some snacks, and get ready to go back. And so that's what Mom does. She goes to the corner store, picks up some things, and about a half an hour later, she comes back. And she's like, oh, like, I don't see Juju. And Grandma's like, well, he was right here. Let's just look for him. I'm sure he's just on the playground. And so they look for him, and they can't find him. They start calling out, Juju, Juju, where are you? He doesn't show up. Then they start, okay, Christopher. This is not a time for Juju. This is a Christopher time. He still doesn't show. And like, they knew almost immediately after that, like, something was desperately wrong. He is a mama's boy, glued to her side, doesn't even like when she does go to the store in situations like this. And so they call the cops like immediately. And everyone comes out for this. And they're canvassing the park and the playground. They like shut down blocks. They even bring like a dog out who gets a scent on Christopher really quickly and then follows it to a sidewalk where it stops immediately. Cops are canvassing the apartment towers around, but even one of the detectives that was on the case says right up front, like, this is a lot of homes, like housing a lot of people in a very, very small space, essentially. Because like, we're talking about like the Martin Luther King Jr. towers. So there's just like apartments on apartments with hallways and rooms everywhere. So not only are you looking at a huge amount of people in a small section of the city, you're looking for a tiny child. Like May is almost 3 and is kind of a giant, but she's like 3 feet tall and 36 pounds. Like, it's still not like a human, like a grown-up human-sized person you're looking for. You're still looking for like a little kid. And because the dog lost the scent and they couldn't find any information in any of the apartment buildings around, they kind of assumed that someone like just took Christopher and, you know, either hopped in a cab or had a car waiting to go. And there was even like a potential for it to be a custody issue because Christopher's mom had had some substance use issues. Dad wasn't in the picture, but dad, you know, cooperated with law enforcement right away, as did mom. And like everybody checked out. And it was just like a complete dead end. This kid vanished from his neighborhood park, essentially. And that's kind of where it stood. And then 3 months later, another little kid, this one was a little over 1.5 years old, named Shane, goes to the same park on the same day of the week, which wasn't mentioned in the documentary, but I thought was really interesting. Both of them went to the park on a Thursday when this happened. And according to his mom, these 2 older kids, they were like 6 and 10, came over and were like, hey, can we play with Shane? And the mom was like, well, I mean, he's a little kid if you really want to. And they're like, yeah, we really want to. Like, we want to play with him. She's like, okay, sure, whatever. And as a mom, I'm like, yeah, please distract him so I don't have to. I get that. And, you know, she's sitting there on the park bench, kind of just hanging out. A guy comes up, sits next to her. She's talking for a little bit. She looks away for a second and Shane is gone. Right away, calls the cops. They search for him, can't find him. And in this case, they even interviewed the kids who had played with Shane, their parents, and even the guy who was talking to Shane's mom. They interviewed everybody that Shane's mom could remember. And everybody checked out. Again, just disappeared into thin air. And this was such a big issue. Like 2 kids, same park, disappeared 3 months away from each other. They even had like this van with like big like announcer horns on it that was like driving around the neighborhood saying like, if you know anything about what happened to these 2 kids, please let us know. Like, we're looking for information from anybody, which is what I imagine like we would get alerts on our phone about now. But like the idea of a van driving around with like speakers doing this is truly, truly wild to me.
Very strange, yeah.
But at one point in time, Shane's mom got a call that her son had been buried underneath this building. And like she called law enforcement right away. They took it so seriously that they even like tore down a building.
Oh my gosh.
Looking for where Shane may have been buried, but he wasn't there. Like, it's literally these kids just like disappeared completely randomly with no one involved. Like, they're just poof, gone. And there's kind of a working theory. I'm not sure how much I personally believe it, and maybe you can like provide some other perspectives, but the working theory is that it may have been like part of an illegal adoption sting, like ring. So like maybe individuals or like an individual providing children to adoptive parents who, you know, couldn't have biological kids and for some reason weren't approved or able to adopt traditionally or through any other means. And so like an individual or themselves like just grabbed these kids from the park one day.
I think that, so I'll tell you just what like my gut reaction was. I mean, it's very dark, and I think that part of that theory aligns with what I was thinking. but I think it's a trafficking thing.
I personally line more predator versus adoption.
Yeah, and I don't even know that it's just like one predator. I mean, the more that I've been learning, researching some of the cases that we've done, and I'm working on this specific project right now it's dark, but it's like all about this, how prevalent it is for like stranger abductions to be tied to not just like a pedophile or a creep, but like these trafficking rings that are statewide, national, global. I don't know why. I don't know this case inside and out. I have nothing to do with it, but I just have this horrible feeling that if we're talking about someone snatching kids for something, I don't think it was adoption.
So there is an example that they provided in like defense of the illegal adoption ring situation, and that is Carlina White. So in 1987, actually almost exactly 2 years before Shane was abducted, or went missing at least, Carlina White was only 19 days old. She had a fever, so her parents took her to the hospital. And while they were there, this woman who was dressed as a nurse was talking to them and comforting them and making, your baby's going to be okay, whatever. And then after a shift change, the nurse left. And that's when Carlina was also discovered to be missing. And again, this is a 19-day-old baby just taken from the hospital. And the only reason we know this story and can connect it as like an adoption ring or abduction, I don't even know what to call it, to be honest, was 23 years later, a girl named Nettie Nance is pregnant and needs to file for health insurance and needs her birth certificate to do so, her certified birth certificate. She asks her mom for it. She gets it, she takes it in, and the people are like, this is a fake birth certificate. This is not real.
And that's where, like, again, to going back to the thing that I was saying, I feel like taking a baby that is like just born, or it reminds me so much of the stories we hear about women who are attacked and their babies cut out of them because someone's like, I want a baby of my own.
They want like the infant experience, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't know why though. It's awful.
To me, these stories are like, oh, sure, while they're like around the same area, like they could be connected, sure, but they feel so different to me.
Yeah. And again, like this fake nurse basically forged a birth certificate, raised this child as her own, and like eventually was caught 23 years later and arrested for this. And Carlina and her biological parents were reunited, which is amazing. But yeah, it just seems unlikely for it to be super, super connected, even though it did happen in the same place to boys who had some similarities. They were both African American. They were around the same age, like 6 months difference. It just seems a little bit like I understand connecting them. Don't get me wrong. But it doesn't seem super connective to me, at least. And I mean, at this point in time, no one has seen or heard from Christopher or Shane since. Like, they would actually both be 33 at this point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there was one article I read on PIX 11 that stated that possibly the same two kids that played with Shane that I mentioned earlier had asked to play with Christopher the same day he went missing, which I thought was interesting, but
this makes my theory even more.
But again, like, at least in Shane's case, like, those kids and their parents were both interviewed and checked out. Like,
yeah, that's true.
We already see, like, later, even if they did play with them, like, this is a close-knit neighborhood in Harlem. Like, all the kids are going to the same park. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary for the same two kids to be playing. Like, I know at least some of my younger cousins love playing with May. Are they, like, 10 years apart? Yes, but they love the idea of, like, having a baby cousin. It kind of feels like that for me, like with these two kids. It doesn't seem super, super weird to me.
I don't know. I think I've been doing this job too long because, like, I can't help thinking, like, the worst. Back in the day, do we even have child sex trafficking, like the words for it, or pedophile or whatever?
Right.
I mean, we know now that a lot of the times it's like kids' relatives or their own parent. I mean, the stuff that's happening to them is often happening to them by someone they know. Could the police even at that time comprehend parents, who are doing this and use their own children to lure them in? I know that's like literally like the darkest extreme I can go to, but I don't know.
So on that note, the Charlie Project lists both of these cases, both Shane and Christopher's, as a non parent or non-familial abduction. So they do not believe anybody in either of their families is involved with their disappearances.
Right. I'm not saying their family. I'm saying the family of the kids they were playing with.
And I agree, but I don't know. So on this line, though, these two cases are actually often connected to the case of Andre Bryant. And he's actually one of the first pictures mentioned at the end of this episode, because Netflix actually lists like a handful of other missing children at the end of this episode, and he's one of the first ones. And there's a lot of differences in here, which I think lean towards your theory more than Christopher and Shane's cases do. So Andre was actually only 6 weeks old when he went missing. And when he went missing, he had gone along, or I guess he didn't go. His mom took him along. He was 6 weeks old. His mom took him along on a shopping trip with some girls that she had supposedly known from middle school. They saw her walking around, like, oh, like, we should all go shopping. We know you, whatever. And she agrees. Now, the next day, her body is found near a river, but no sign of Andre, no sign of a vehicle, no sign of these two friends. And Andre, who would now be 31, has never been seen since.
That's so strange.
And again, like, because that actually happens earlier in 89 than Christopher and Shane's cases do, but they're all in New York City. They're all young African-American children. Again, Andre is a newborn versus like toddlers like Christopher and Shane, but they often get linked together because of the similarities. And again, they just like vanish into thin air. And I feel like this is pretty much like all I have to say about this case, because I don't know what happened. It's an unsolved mystery, obviously. But I think it's a good time to point out that if you, fan club members, have anything that you know about any of the cases we've talked about, you can go to unsolved.com and provide tips.
And we'll do this again. No? Next time
they drop more episodes.
Yeah.
Don't forget, if you want more Crime Junkie episodes like this bonus content, new members can try the Fan Club app for free for the rest of July and all of August when you sign up through our website. Just head to the link in the show notes and make sure you hit the follow button here so you don't miss any bonus content that we put out. We'll be popping back in this feed next Thursday with another Vault episode. Bye, Crime Junkies. Crime Junkie is an Audio Chuck production. So, what do you think, Chuck? Do you approve?